Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presentation is from our Chief of Police, Chief Jeffrey Blackwell, and any of his team that would like to support him in the presentation. So we're going to talk around a variety of issues, and of course, Chief will give you all the time that you need to brief the committee. I know I have some questions about what I'm going to call the elephant in the room, which is our relationship with the University of Cincinnati and their campus police department. That clearly is a topic that I think we should spend some time discussing. I want to start off by just extending my deepest condolences for the DuBose family, and to publicly express my gratitude for their continual call for peace in the city of Cincinnati. So those who might have a different narrative, clearly the family's narrative has been clearly articulated, not just in the city of Cincinnati, but across the entire nation, about what their expectations have been. And I just appreciate that, and want to continue to affirm the family, let them know that we will be all about transparency, that we will continue to support peaceful protest in the city of Cincinnati, but also will be clear about our expectations for lawlessness, and that in the city of Cincinnati, we certainly will not accept any inappropriate behavior. But Chief, you have the floor, and again, I thank you for your work and your service to the city of Cincinnati. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Councilwoman Simpson, Councilman Flynn. Thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about where we are with body cameras. I think the events of this past week have illustrated to every one of us here in Cincinnati the need to have the body camera technology. And we have, as you all know, we presented on this topic several months ago. We have been looking at body camera platforms for well over a year, probably about 18 months. And so we've done a lot of the heavy lifting. We think we're ready to really move forward. We've been researching the industry. We've had a wear test program already that was very successful. We continue to have due diligence because a lot of the bigger agencies like us have run into problems with all of the ancillary cost and program issues that come along with a body camera program when you have a large agency. Storage, retrieval, cost, redaction, all of those things. For example, for 1 hour of redaction, it takes a human about 3 to 4 hours to do that job. Obviously, with the Ohio public records laws being as robust as they are, we have issues that some other states do not have. So we have to look at those costs. We're going to have to hire a team of people. Technology is emerging literally monthly in this arena. So we're going to move forward with much more clarity.
Mr. Chair, if I can just, I didn't mean to interrupt the chief, but this relates to something that I had suggested before we went on break, before the urgency came up, and that is that while we certainly want these records to be available to the public, so much of the information that is on these tapes is not needed. And so much of the cost is associated with, as you said, with redaction and finding the specific amounts of information that we have to. Is there an opportunity for Ohio, and I know that we as a city can't do this, but we can perhaps bring it to the attention of our state legislators to perhaps copy what some other states do relative to the public records, relative to body cameras. And if you've got any suggestions of model states that we can model against, I think that we would be willing to do this. We certainly don't want to keep information from the public that's important, but we also don't want unnecessary costs for keeping this information
Right.
or causing the redaction of the information.
That's a wonderful idea, Councilman Flynn, and we would definitely want to work with our law department. I do know that I don't think any of the major cities in Ohio to date have a platform, body camera platform, due to public records laws and how to manage it with the robust public records access. Some states that have similar laws have abandoned their camera programs because they just simply cannot afford to manage the program with all of the public records requests that come in for the viewing of different incidents. So we don't want to start a program and have to back out of it or abandon it because we can't maintain it. So that would be a wonderful idea if the state of Ohio would look at relaxing some of the laws as they pertain to body camera footage. And now Ellie is going to talk about the different variables that we're going to look at as we move forward.
Good morning, sirs.
Good morning and welcome.
The city manager convened a committee of representatives from several different departments: finance, budget, IT, law, and we've met a couple of times. We have divided the challenge of body cameras into several areas and are forming teams to work on those various areas. One of the areas is just what you mentioned, Councilmember Flynn. It's the data management and access. And that team will be contacting Columbus and working with other departments to see what they've done in order to figure out what we can do in that area. We've got a team for operations, when to record, when not to record, that kind of thing. A team to work with the officers about their concerns, a team to work with the public and council about your concerns, and a team to work on equipment specifications, basically to help us get an RFP up and running. All of these teams have a kickoff meeting scheduled for this Thursday at 2 o'clock at the Academy. We're going to go over what we learned in the wear testing that we did last year. Where we are, I have compiled a list of other departments, major cities that have body camera programs for them, contacts in those departments. A lot of the literature that's out there on this, we've compiled for them, so that each one of these teams can take their area and run with it to try to get the best information we can on what we want to do. We hope to have a lot of this compiled by the time we find out whether we got either one of the grants, which should be in 6 to 8 weeks. Then we're ready to hit the ground running with developing our policies and procedures. We'd like to have an RFP ready to go by the first of the year. We hope to have the cameras purchased and be able to get them on our teams before the summer heats up for next year.
There were some discussions about, so I just want to spend some time getting a little into the weeds about where the body cameras are going to be on the officer. I've seen some on the chest, I've seen some on the shoulder, I've seen, I think, maybe even some on the head. And also talk a little bit about the officers, unlike the cameras in the cruisers, that when the siren comes on, it's my understanding the camera begins to record and then even backs up a little bit as far as footage. What happens with the body camera when the button is pressed, or in situations where the button might not be pressed? How do other police departments deal with those situations?
Very, very good question, sir. The technology is much like the cruiser cams, and they do have a 30-second backup feature that I think we saw in the DeBose case of last week. A big issue, however, is when to turn them on, when not to have them on, and more specifically, there have been situations in other cities where the camera clearly should have been on and was not. And we all know that Cincinnati has a healthy amount of people that will will come over to my office and try to run me out of town if we have a situation where the camera should be on and it's not on, or there's a malfunction, as we've had with our outdated cruiser cam technology platform. So those are all of the questions and issues that we're going to work out in these committees as we move forward.
The $2 million that council approved, it's my understanding that those dollars are going to be used for technology inside of the cruisers. which would include possibly our cameras, our camera cruisers, but will not be used for the body cameras. We will spend new dollars, whether it's grant money or whether it's new commitment of capital dollars from our budget to support the body cameras. And I think it's important to make sure that everybody understands that we're not spending the $2 million on the body cameras. This is a new spend. And if you kind of spend some time affirming that that's accurate.
That is accurate. We have, Ellie and myself and the assistant chiefs have been working very hard to prioritize our technology needs, and we do have a very long list of needs in the technology platform, but our CAD system, our records management system, our connectivity for our officers in the field so that they become more efficient and effective is the #1 priority. We're looking at tablets for each officer so that they can improve the speed at which they can come in and take a report and get that report entered into our RMS. So that is our #1 priority, first and foremost. And then we're looking at some other technologies such as ShotSpotter, which identifies gunshots anywhere in the city and allows us to know within about 5 to 10 feet of where those shots were fired. We're looking at that technology as well. So we don't have a shortage of things for the $2 million that you so graciously gave us, but the body camera platform is not falling within that purview.
I also just want to make sure that I publicly say that this committee has been talking about body cameras, and I say this very respectfully, prior to the DuBose case, that we're not reacting to what is happening, which if we needed to react, we would react. I just want to be clear that we're not, that this is something the committee has been working on, that the administration and your team has been working on for a long period of time, and we're trying to do it right. We're trying to make sure that we cross all the T's and dot all the I's, and that we're not having a knee-jerk reaction, so that when we roll out the technology, Captain Wiseman and his team, they're ready to do the training. We're adding another thing for you to do training on, Captain Wiseman, in the academy, but that everything is tight and it's measured. And I think other municipalities should be cautious and make sure that they're doing the proper investigation on not only the cost, but how to use the technology, that we're working through all of those best practices before they just run out and implement all of this new technology. So everybody knows what we're getting into. #2, I haven't talked to a police officer who says that they are not interested in adopting it in Cincinnati. So I want to make sure that I speak to that every police officer that I've spoken to is ready for the body cameras. They view the body cameras as a way to protect them. I've heard from the little research that I've done on it, and I'm sure you all have done a lot, that it even alters the behavior of the citizen who might have a different attitude. But now knowing that they're being recorded on what are not routine traffic stops, also their behavior is altered, and that our professional police department believes that this protects them because they're out there doing a great job and aren't worried about what is being recorded as they're engaging citizens. And I just want to publicly say that our professional police department is prepared and ready to adopt the technology. Vice Chair?
Just a couple things. One, the clerk asked that you don't turn the microphones off, because then she has to go over and turn it back on. So, the second thing, I mean, just to reiterate what our chair said, I mean, I think you guys gave us a report last February on the body cameras and how we had looked at basically the two different systems in the pilot program that had actually happened during 2014. So I just want to applaud that the Cincinnati Police Department was out ahead of the curve on this, that this isn't being reactionary, that we're trying to get what will be best for our department, for our city. And then secondly, whatever it is you need, and I understand that these will be additional dollars, and I saw Mr. Bigham in the crowd here. This is the highest priority, and we will work to find those dollars. Before other monies get spent on other things, this becomes a priority, along with making sure that the officers have the wireless technology that's necessary to file the reports from their cars, making sure that the computers that were state-of-the-art in 1999 when they were instituted, aren't running on Windows 2003 now.
Right.
I think this is a very key issue. We've got a highly trained, very professional police force. They need the tools to do their job.
I think municipalities understand that we can't afford not to do it. The cost of not doing it is so high. And we're not just talking about dollars here, right? We're talking about the entire image of the city.
Absolutely.
So we're talking about billions of dollars and making sure that our citizens have complete transparency. And as you know, technology is moving so fast that what we're adopting today, we might continue to make those improvements as the technology even gets better and better. I mean, what we're rolling out next year for next summer, what I'm trying to articulate is that as that technology gets better, we want to make sure that we continue to invest in it so that we don't get behind the curve. So I agree that we have to prioritize this in the budget, that we have to spend whatever it takes to make sure that we have the backup for the cameras, and that we align that with the training for the officer, because one of the things we don't want to do is underinvest, and it's our technology that is failing the officers on the street. It's one thing for them to press the button, it's another thing for them to press the button and it not work. So we want to make sure that we are on top of this technology to the best of our ability. Councilmember
Mr. Chair,
Simpson.
thank you. Just a few points. One, I do want to make sure that we strongly reiterate the point that you just made about the dollars. I think there was some miscommunication and maybe the way that our city manager articulated during the press conference in particular, but at other places, about what our concerns have been about body cameras, and money has never been an issue, at least from this body, and been very clear from this seat and with the city manager and with everybody that what Mr. Smitherman articulated, which is there is not a cost that we won't pay to have a technology that saves lives or that helps keep our community safe and keep public trust intact. So money's not an issue, and we won't let it be that. Never will be, never was. So that's very clear. I think, I love the timeline that Ms. Topham gave. I think that's a very good timeline. It's something that people can wrap their arms around. I think the thing that I've always been clear about is making sure that the public has the education they need about this technology so that they understand the limitations of the technology, how the technology can and cannot be used. I think there's a big issue around the Sandra Bland case because people are saying, is it cut together? Is there a glitch? What's going on? People need to understand, and we need to educate the public, maybe in the 6 months before the rollout. Here's when they're on, here's when they're off, here's what you will see, here's what you won't see, because that public mistrust could make what is the best video footage we can get appear to be something that's manipulated. Now, I don't know what's happening in the Sandra Bland case. I don't understand the technology, but there's a huge belief in that area that has been altered in some way. And my question is that even possible? So we want to answer those questions before we roll out the technology, because as you said, in the city of Cincinnati, if there's something wrong with that footage, you're going to hear it. We're going to hear it, our city is going to be in trouble. So we need a kind of a robust public information platform, and maybe we weave some citizens in some of this training that we're providing so that citizens understand what they're going to see, what the limitations are of the technology, and what it can and cannot do. I think that's really important. It might not be a bad idea to have our prosecutors also talk about how the technology and the evidence can and will be used in court, because there are certain limitations on how that evidence will be weighed by the judge and or the jury in a case. So we just want to lay that foundation so that if an incident happens, heaven forbid it happens, everybody understands what will happen with the footage, how it can be used and how it cannot, because that mistrust can cause great technology to really stab us in the back or hurt us in the future. So I think that's a really, really important thing. I think the third thing, we talked a little bit about talking to the state, and I don't know if our lobbyists are on this, about what I call the prioritization of public records requests. I don't know if anybody's going to let you relax a public records request, especially in this state, but understanding the limitations of the technology to say, hey, there are certain requests that are really, really, really important. If someone is shot, that needs to be the first thing that we're prioritizing. If somebody has a request for something that is non-fatal, something that is non-life-threatening, then maybe that's something that we take a little bit more time with. It may take us a little while to get that to you, or maybe there's other forms of evidence that we can provide to you in the short term. So I think that's an important thing that we could probably talk to our friends up at the state about getting on board within the next year. I don't know that you're ever going to get a relaxation, but I think just the prioritization is what could help us. If we don't have one person that's so busy trying to get out public records requests on these kind of smaller incidents, and then when you have a critical incident, you don't have the resources remaining to be able to do that. The final thing, which is something that I think we really need to talk about collectively as a committee and as a body, is this whole regional idea. UC Police was kind of at the heart of what happened with Samuel DuBose. We know that. That was not our police department. I think it's really, really important for body cameras and for policing in general for us to have a regional conversation with all of our law enforcement about making sure we're all in step. That doesn't mean that Blue Ash needs to do a collaborative agreement or the Sheriff's Department needs to do one, but I think it's I don't want to say a waste of time, but I think it's very sad that we have one of the best policing practices and we're a role model and people around the country are taking notice, but a citizen from the city of Cincinnati could drive into St. Bernard or Norwood or Blue Ash and not have the benefit of that same policing model. I think it's important for no matter where you live within the region, you know that you're going to have the same law enforcement response no matter where you go. You cross that line between Cincinnati and Norwood, you cross that line between Cincinnati and St. Bernard, you cross that line and you're out in Mason or Westchester, or which citizens do every single day, and you might get a different response once you cross that line. I think it's really important, and we've had enough time with the collaborative, we had enough time with this model, and we've had enough experience with this incident with body cams to know that as a region, we need to be working together to make sure that no matter where you travel in the city of Cincinnati region, you're gonna get a response that is similar, that people of all backgrounds, whether they be African American or not, can feel safe that when they cross into another part of the region, I don't have to worry about what's going to happen because I'm going to have a similar response. So I don't know if those conversations are happening, but the body camera technology could be part of that conversation. Have we talked to our regional partners to see if they're planning in the next 5 years to invest in body camera technology? Is that something they can afford? Is that something that they don't believe is important? And if they don't believe it's important, then why? Our policing model, this wonderful policing model we've built in response to a horrible time in tragedy, series of tragedies in 2000, is great. And I think it's great that other places are taking notice, but if we don't have that consistency within this region, then I don't know that it helps us. So, Mr. Chair, I'll give that to you, that very full plate to you, so that we as a committee can continue to consider and have conversations with our regional partners about, is this the time where we say, as a region, we will have consistency in policing so that no matter where you go, whether you're on UC's campus or you're in Norwood or St. Bernard, or I don't want to pick on anybody, but you get the gist, you know you get the same police response, the same quality of service. You know that you can be safe because we're under a similar model. I think it's time to have that conversation.
One of the things that I got from serving on the Attorney General's committee, which essentially was on training, everything comes back to training, is that the smaller municipalities want this training. They want to have the continuing education, and they have tremendous respect for other municipalities that have budgets that allow their police departments and their chiefs to do the things that our chief and our command staff are able to do. I think we have to have a statewide discussion, which I think is what Councilmember Simpson is saying here, on how we pay for law enforcement where we have smaller municipalities and smaller jurisdictions. And I think it's just important for me to note that they want the training. This isn't typically an issue of what they can afford. They don't have Captain Wiseman dedicated to a training, to a closed shop where, you know, I'm not going to say the expenses are unlimited, but clearly there's a sizable budget in order for us to train our officers and to do the continuing education that is needed for those officers. So there are chiefs around us that I think, you know, having sat on that committee, that the legislature is going to have to wrestle with really committing some dollars to law enforcement for not only continuing education, but also the upfront training, whether that's the psychological exams that we do before a person even comes in, you know, to our closed shop. Making sure the background investigations are at the same level that we do the background investigations. So most of the time, at least is what we found, is that the law enforcement, smaller municipalities, this is an issue of money. Not all the time, but most of the time, it's an issue of resources. Councilmember Simpson.
Thank you. I think that's right. I think it all starts with a bit of a conversation. And we've been fortunate in the human trafficking area. There are 7 or 8 law enforcement agencies in the region that meet regularly with the entire group to talk about the issue of how we handle trafficking incidents, because they're deeply impacted by the issue. So that's happened as a result of just kind of a collaborative that was built around the change court that was instituted, and a need within certain municipalities where there's a high concentration of that. And we've been able to kind of synergize, if you will. And I've talked to my counterparts in those municipalities and said, we've got this legislation that's increased fines. We'll send it over to you. We think you should adopt it too. And the law enforcement agencies, including the Sheriff's Department, have been a part of the conversations about how are we handling this issue from it. Because as you know, just like a citizen can drive into another municipality and have an encounter with an officer that's not CPD, we know that the trafficking work that we do crosses into different municipalities. It doesn't help the city of Cincinnati to have a focused response if it can move 1 block over and be somewhere else. So I do believe that the resources need to be there, but there also needs, and that may be our job, is to advocate collectively with our regional partners to get more resources to this effort. But I also think that a conversation can be had, and I'm guessing there are some conversations, but it would be great to have a more comprehensive and more aggressive series of conversations, particularly in response to what's just happened in our city, that, you know, could something like this happen in another municipality just outside city limits? It's really, really important to have those conversations now.
I'd like to direct, just so that we don't lose track of a few agenda items. So Attorney Harding, if I will ask, if you will ask the administration to prepare a discussion about our laws, our state laws around public information request, so that we just have a discussion about it from a legal perspective, and you're educating our committee about that and how those laws might impact the body camera discussion. So we kind of bring those two things together. And then I think it will point to Councilmember Simpson and the Vice Chair Flynn's position on how we need to direct our lobbyists to advocate at the state level and as we adopt this technology. But I feel like I still need to be educated on what the laws are and how expansive or how narrow they are, and then hopefully then direct our lobbyists to go to the state and do the proper lobbying. And I think the second point is to have a discussion, and maybe we invite our lobbyists to our next law and public safety meeting. I think that would be helpful. And I don't know exactly how to do that, Attorney Harding, so I'm just going to publicly say that to ask if you'll help facilitate that, so that we can have a discussion about placing on the agenda costs for our law enforcement, meaning, you know, what are the levers? What do we need to do? Is this a state tax? Is this a legislature kind of lobby for more dollars to be dedicated for training for our our smaller municipalities and even our larger municipalities. But what is that process? I certainly would like to meet the lobbyist, be able to kick the tires. I think committee members might have a variety of things that they would like to talk to the lobbyist about beyond even this committee's work, but I think that would be important to do. Chief, let's go back to kind of the conversation. Does our committee feel like we've exhausted our conversation on body cameras? Are you comfortable with where we are? I'd like in closing for just a reiteration on when you think the timeline will be for the rollout, and is the rollout going to be for all officers? How many officers? Kind of like, just kind of give us a picture of what that's going to look like, if you know.
The number that we roll out will depend on whether we get either one of those grants, not because of funding, but because of the requirements of the grants. The one grant, the larger grant, would roll them out to all of our patrol officers. The smaller of the two grants is actually a study grant, so it would necessitate that we give cameras to some officers and have some officers without cameras so that we can do some comparison study on the reaction of the public, the use of force, those kind of things. So how many we deploy will depend on which, if either, of those grants we get. Obviously, if we don't get either grant, then it'll depend on funding. The timeline, again, we're hoping that we can get an RFP out right after the first of the year. That'll take a couple of months to work through, to get the purchase, then to do the training. We want to have the cameras available to the officers before things heat up next summer.
And I guess the follow-up question is, because there are very large corporations that provide the cameras. As a stockbroker, I hear a lot about Taser International, but they're clearly smaller operators that I'm sure will be focused on this. Are there any local companies that provide this technology? And that's just one question. And then, is the RFP for the camera separate from the technology that backs up the cameras of holding the information? Are those two separate RFPs, or is this just one package? Whoever provides the cameras also provides the backup technology.
What the RFP will do, first of all, the committees are set up to research all of the options that are out there, to find all of the different companies and what their options are. Once we know what's out there, we will construct an RFP, not to identify a camera we want, but to identify what we want in a camera, so that we'll put everything down, whether it's currently available or not, that we're looking for in a camera, and then see what company is going to meet our requirements. As far as the data storage, that's what one of the committees will be researching too, as far as our capacity, whether we need to do cloud storage or whether we have the capacity to do storage on site, what we want. That will be specified in the RFP as well, so that whichever camera we choose will kind of identify then what our storage needs are. Camera systems like Taser, actually, the storage is all part of the purchase. They do cloud storage, so you can contract with them to store your data and retrieve your data. Other cameras don't. It's a local storage. So it's all yet to be determined, basically. That's what these committees are set up to research, find what we think will be best for Cincinnati, and then go forward from there.
And the other point that I'd like to talk about, and I think this is again to Attorney Harding when we come back, is an understanding of, and I think I know the answer to it, but I'd like to have a public discussion about when the public can record. So there have been, I've been watching interactions every once in a while on YouTube on smaller municipalities where a citizen picks up a camera and they begin recording, and even national stories, and the police officer responds a certain way, even saying you cannot record. So I want to have a clear understanding, because I've heard this discussion, as officers are going to have body cameras, what we're also seeing is that citizens are getting a lot more assertive with having cameras in their vehicles, having their cell phones where they're recording. So there are lots of recordings that are out there, and I want to make sure that I'm clear as the Chair of Law and Public Safety, and our officers are clear, when those recordings are appropriate. Now, as I sit here, I believe that those recordings are always appropriate if they're on public streets. But I'm not sure about it, and I don't want to go into that discussion today. I just want to come back to it. Captain Wiseman, he's going for his mic, so.
Good morning, Chairman. We actually published a training bulletin and added that to our day one in service last year. Pete Stackpool came over and did the training about when citizens can film the police. So I could provide your office and the rest of the council members a copy of that training bulletin that we actually did at one of our in-service sessions last year.
That would be perfect.
For all of the officers got that in-service training.
That would be perfect. And that, again, is, you said all the officers got the training.
Yes,
Right.
every officer in CPD got the training bulletin and the training by Pete Stackpool at our in-service training at the academy.
It's just another, it's just another example of how much training goes on with our police department, and you're not saying we're just providing the training for the 18 laterals, but we're doing this for all of our police officers. And again, this always comes back to budgets because it takes money to do that kind of training, and it takes commitment, but it also takes resources. So does the committee feel like we've exhausted this discussion? Are all of you comfortable as we move on to the next discussion?
Mr. Chair, I think that's right. I think what I hear from Ms. Topham is that the next critical point is when we kind of find out whether we got the grant or which grant. Could we get both grants? That would be awesome. Okay, never mind. I just need to know what to pray for. So we want the bigger grant, right? And we'll know about that in the next 6 to 8 weeks. Is that right? So that'll be a next trigger point for us. Sorry for the pun, trigger. That'll be the next point at which we would expect to hear something back is whether or not we receive the grant within the next 2 months or so. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Anytime we adopt technology, and I said this earlier, I'm just reiterating it, we also have to make a commitment to continuing to invest in the technology, because the cameras that we buy in 2016 might not be as relevant, I'm going to say 4 years out. So we might not have a grant to apply to get 1,000 cameras in this example. And at that point, the city would need to make a capital investment of our own dollars. So once we adopt this technology, we have to be committed to it. And we just can't, just have cameras inside cruisers that are 20 years old. We have to make sure that we continue to invest in it. I just want to continue to say that. There's a deferred maintenance issue here, and we're not going to always have grants. I'm going to say very confidently that based on what's happening around the country, we're going to get the biggest grant, and that the country knows that Cincinnati has the best police department in the country, and that we're always on the cutting edge, and that they like investing in our city based on how we handle our business here. So I'm feeling confident that we're going to get the largest grant. The question's going to be, are we going to remain committed over the years to continuing to invest in the technology to make sure that it remains absolutely the best? Chief?
Mr. Chairman, that's a very good point, and I had a conversation with a good friend of mine who's the chief in Dallas, and one of the things when they adopted their program just recently is that they had an agreement with TASER that all new emerging technology was replaced or included in their platform at no charge, because it's really on about a 1-year cycle before cameras improve and technology improves, and he got that worked into his contract, which was, he has a very big department and there's a lot of money involved, but he was able to get that included, and we want to do that as well.
I'm hoping that one day the technology, and this is just from a layman's perspective, and I have a son who's really into videography. I mean, he just loves it and invests a lot of time and energy in it. But when those cameras, when officers are running, that the camera is adjusting itself so it remains still. Because what we're seeing is all of these different images, but eventually the technology, I believe, is going to be good enough that no matter what movement the officer is doing, that camera is going to remain still and pointed and not actually move in every direction that the officer is moving in. But that would be another example of the technology is going to continue to get better over time.
You're right, but some of that movement is necessary because we're talking about truth telling.
About what now?
About truth-telling.
Oh, yes.
And when the camera is jostling, you understand that the officer is being jostled and moving and falling and doing different things. So I think some of that is necessary for the authenticity of what the officer probably experienced.
That's an excellent point. And what I also want to state is that, you know, on some of the YouTube recordings that I've looked at, there are 3 or 4 officers with 3 or 4 cameras catching different angles. So it's not just one angle. So, you know, one officer might not turn it on, but there might be 2 other officers who do turn it on. You know, and I'm not saying that every scene you're not going to have a case where there's not one officer there with a camera, but the point is that you're catching a situation from a variety of angles. And what I was looking at was a situation where the citizen had a knife, I believe. It was a domestic call, and the backup officers were able to catch it. Now, he was, without those cameras, what happened, the interaction, what you saw when the officers arrived, and the officers showed tremendous restraint, even after they chased the citizen through the backyard and all of that. But it was the other cameras that were actually catching the officer in this the citizen in this domestic violence situation with this woman. And that testimony ultimately, the camera ultimately convicted the citizen who was giving a different narrative of what had occurred in that house.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, technology will continue to change. Just look at our cell phones and the cameras on them, and how in the course of 2 years, they've gone from what were grainy, pixelated photos to something that's better than the best 35 millimeter camera that you could get 10 years ago. But another challenge to Mr. Bigham is, and the way that we'll be able to do this is by putting aside, you know, we've balanced our budget, and we'll continue to balance our budget. But beyond balancing our budget, we need to start putting aside money for capital reserves, so that it's not, oh, we need to replace this, now we've got to come up with this huge amount of money. We've put a little bit away every year, just like a homeowner should when they know they're going to have to replace the roof in 10 years. They put away a little bit every year, and then in that 10th year, they can replace the roof without it being a hardcore.
So thank you all very much. We're going to move to our next subject matter, which we're going to talk a little bit about the University of Cincinnati and